Hey friends, welcome back to my kitchen. Today I'm going to be sharing an egg white bread recipe with you, and I think it's probably my favorite loaf recipe as far as flavor, as far as texture. And it is a recipe that I've shared before, but it was in an experiment video, so it's kind of hard to find. And I decided after a lot of feedback from you guys that I needed to make some more dedicated recipe videos for some of these recipes, just so that they're easier to find and to follow. So I do want to say right off the bat that this recipe is more complex. There's always like this balance between simplicity as far as the recipe, like the ease of the recipe, and then taste. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes the more complicated the recipe, the better taste and texture you can get. I have found that with the egg white bread recipe for sure. So if you're one that values just simplicity overall and you're not worried so much about like achieving this artisan bread taste, then this might not be the recipe for you. But if you love experimenting in the kitchen and you have time to play and you enjoy it, then this could be a great one for you. Now, if you're like me, you already have a container full of frozen shredded butter in your freezer. You have one there at all times because you never know when you might need it for a recipe. But if you are not like me and you do not have that prepped already, the very first thing you're gonna wanna do is put your butter in the freezer. Once it's frozen solid, you're gonna wanna grate it. I use a salad shooter. That's just the easiest way. And so if you have one of those, definitely use that. Although you can use a hand grater as well. It just takes a little bit more elbow grease. And what you want to do is shred it quickly and get it right back into the freezer as fast as you can and leave it in the freezer until it's time to add it to the recipe. Beyond the frozen shredded butter, what we're going to use for this recipe is warm water, somewhere between 100 and 110 degrees. This recipe actually does have yeast in it. So that's the next ingredient, and that yeast actually makes the egg white bread rise. This is something that completely blew my mind when I first saw Alicia from Keto Upgrade do it in one of her videos, and of course I had to try it and it works great. So we're going to use some active dry yeast as well as some form of sugar or fiber that the yeast can eat. Sadly, yeast cannot eat allulose. Allulose is already in there. It would be nice if it worked. But what we are going to use this time is inulin. Yeast can eat inulin, so it's a great thing to feed the yeast. You could also use honey or any other type of sugar that you have. Yeast can eat that as well. And because the yeast is actually going to be eating it during the proofing time, you can be certain that you're not going to have the same carb count that you start with in the finished product. I don't know for sure how much of the carb count ends up in the finished product, but it should be reduced because the yeast is actually eating it. We're also going to be adding some cream of tartar, some Redmond real salt, some beef gelatin. I use the Now brand, but you can use any unflavored gelatin that you like. And then we will also be using some allulose. Allulose is not to make the bread sweet necessarily. It does give a little bit of a nice flavor as well as a nice texture. And the main reason we use it is because it allows the bread to brown. If you don't use it, if you substitute it with a different sweetener, you'll probably get a much paler of a loaf and oftentimes more crumbly of a loaf. Then I do add a couple tablespoons of arrowroot starch to my recipes. I only use a couple of tablespoons, so it's like less than a carb per slice. And of course, it wouldn't be egg white bread without egg whites. I'm going to be using the Now brand egg white powder for this recipe. I already have my loaf pan prepared with the parchment paper in there. I use 2 sheets of parchment paper that fit in there like a T or an X. And that allows it to lay down flat. I do have a short video showing how I do that, so I will link that up in the cards. I will also have a link to this pan that I use on Amazon if you're curious about the size. It is a little bit bigger than some loaf pans. A quick interruption to say thank you to Element for sponsoring today's video. Element is part of my everyday routine. Supplementing with electrolytes has been so important for me in my keto journey to help me feel my best. And Element makes it really, really easy to remember to take my electrolytes because they taste so delicious. They have all kinds of fruity flavors that are really refreshing for the summertime. And then they also have chocolate salt, which is great in hot drinks as well. Summertime is grapefruit season. So if you want to try the new grapefruit salt, you have a little more time time to do that. Also, right now, Element is offering a special deal to any of my viewers. If you use my link here on the screen or down in the description, you can get a free sample pack of all 8 of their regular flavors with any order. So all you have to do is go to drinkelement.com/indigo. That's drinklmnt.com/indigo. Place your order and you'll get your free sample pack. Element really does make it possible for me to provide the content that I provide to you for free. So I am very grateful for their support, and thank you guys so much for supporting the companies that do support my channel. First thing I'm going to do is add 295 milliliters or 1 1/4 cups of hot water to a bowl, a small bowl. You want the water to be between 100 and 110 degrees, and that'll allow for the yeast to proof. I am going to add 1 teaspoon of inulin to the warm water, and I'm just going to give it a little whisk to make sure it's all dissolved. It dissolves pretty fast. Next, I'm going to sprinkle my 2 1/4 teaspoons or 9 grams of yeast over the water. And the 2 1/4 teaspoons is the same amount that's in a packet of yeast. So if you want to just keep it simple, you can buy it in the packets. Now I'm going to take this and go put it in my dehydrator. I have it set for 105 degrees. That's the temperature that I'm going to use later on when I proof the loaf. And so it's just going to sit in the warm dehydrator while I get the other ingredients mixed up, and that'll allow the yeast to proof and to get all foamy. Now I'm going to get all of my dry ingredients just mixed up in my KitchenAid bowl here. I'm going to start with 100 grams of egg white powder. And 100 grams of egg white powder is supposed to be equivalent to about 1 1/4 cups, but I always recommend going by weight rather than volume because it can get packed down in a cup measurement and you can get way too much and end up with a really dry end result. So going by weight is always the best choice. Next, I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of beef gelatin. I'm going to do 1 1/2 teaspoons of cream of tartar, and that adds a little bit of a sourdough taste, and I enjoy that little bit of a sourdough flavor. Some people find they don't like it, so if you don't like that, then you can reduce the cream of tartar down to 1/2 teaspoon and you'll still get the stabilizing effect, but not so much of that sour taste. Now I'm going to add 1/2 teaspoon of Redmond real salt, and of course you can use any salt that you like, but Redmond of course is my favorite. I'm going to do 1/4 cup of allulose, which comes out to 36 grams. And if you want to reduce the allulose, you totally can. You'll get a little bit lighter the less allulose you use, but you could totally get away with 1 or 2 tablespoons if you really want to reduce it. And I'm just going to get this a little bit whisked up to get it combined before I go grab my wet ingredients. My yeast is nice and foamy and ready to go. The last ingredient I'm going to add at this point is the 2 tablespoons of arrowroot powder, and that is 16 grams. Just adding it into the yeast mixture. In this recipe, the yeast actually does eat the arrowroot. So even though it does add a little bit of carbs, a lot of that carb count is going to get eaten up in the finished product. I don't know how much gets eaten up, like I said about the inulin, but it should be less than what you started with. And even the amount that is started with, since it's such a small amount, is still very, very low carb. Now I'm going to add the wet ingredients to the dry ingredients and just whisk that a little bit by hand to get everything moistened before I head over to the KitchenAid. I'm going to start the mixer out on low and gradually increase the speed to high to avoid the splatter. And then I'll mix it until it's got a nice like shaving cream type texture. That usually takes somewhere around 5 to 10 minutes. All right, that's been going for about 6 minutes, and I'm gonna go ahead and add my frozen shredded butter. That's what it looks like. And 1 stick is the amount that's supposed to go in this recipe, and that's 120 grams. So if you have it in a container like I do, you just have to measure out the 120 grams. And I'm just gonna mix this in real gently until it's just mixed, not whipped. I'm going to give the batter a quick mix just to make sure everything is incorporated. And just going to spread it into my prepared pan. Now we're gonna head down to the dehydrator and get it proofing for 1 hour. I have it set on 105 degrees. You should have it between 90 and 105 degrees. I'm just going all the way to the 105. And I'm just gonna slide this in here and wait for an hour. 1 hour is up. I'm going to take this upstairs. If you dehydrate it or proof it at the right temperature, it'll be kind of dry on top, so it's not gooey anymore. I will score the top and then get it into the oven for baking. Going to gently try to get a nice little line on top here. My oven is already preheated to 325. I'll throw it in. And I think, what's the time? 40 minutes. Cook time is 40 to 45 minutes, so we will see how long it takes. Start a timer for 40 minutes called butter bread.
Okay, a 40-minute timer called butter bread. Starting now.
There is the beautiful artisan butter loaf. It smells amazing. I love how it's not like some crazy shape. It actually like split on the split that I made. It's just beautiful. I'm gonna let this cool in the pan just for like 5 minutes. Then I will pull it out of the pan and let it cool all the way on a wire rack. Then we will slice. All right, let's go ahead and give this a slice. You can see it kept its shape, no sinking sides. Love that. The butter smell is very strong. It just smells so good. So you can see that inside texture. Got some really nice big bubbles in there, but it's still super, super soft. The texture on this bread, I think, is just top notch. It is my absolute favorite of all of the breads that I have done. It's soft, airy, but then it's got the butter in there, so it's not choky. It like melts in your mouth. It is absolutely delicious. So if you do have the time and energy to put into this recipe, I think it is absolutely well worth it. I always get asked if these breads toast, and the answer is yes, they absolutely do. You can toast them in a regular toaster, or you can fry them on the pan like a grilled cheese sandwich. The only recommendation that I have is to cook them at a little lower temperature than you would cook regular bread, and to check them often because it does brown, especially with the allulose. It browns really, really fast, and so it'll take less time and brown faster than regular bread. So you just kind of have to get used to that timing, but it makes great toast, especially with the butter in there. Toasting just doesn't make it, too dry. So great for all those toasting applications, as well as like French toast, of course, sandwiches, and I love it for like dipping in soups. That is like one of those things where I didn't think that I would be able to enjoy that again on a keto diet, but you really get that like bread dipped into soup, like that hearty feel when you have something like this with your keto soups. Oh, I actually have a whole playlist of keto bread and soup recipes. I did a series where I did bread and soup of the week, and so I'd try a different bread experiment and also a soup to go with it. And so I will put that playlist here at the end if you want to check it out. I'll see you over there.